Conditional statements are used to make decisions based on different conditions. By default, statements in JavaScript are executed sequentially from top to bottom. If you want to process some logic, the sequential flow of execution can be altered in two ways. First one is going to be conditional execution, meaning a block of one or more statements will be executed if a certain expression is true. Second one is going to be a repetitive execution, meaning a block of one or more statements will be repeatedly executed as long as a certain expression is true. In this section or in this video, we will cover if, else, if statements. Remember the comparison and logical operators we learned in the previous videos. Those will be useful in learning these conditionals. So conditionals can be implemented using following ways. First one is going to be if condition. Second one is going to be if else. Third one is if else and another if else, and a fourth one is going to be switch, and also a ternary operator, which we already learned in previous video. So let's discuss these one by one, starting with if. So let's talk about if condition. In JavaScript and other programming languages, the keyword if is used to check if a condition is true and to execute the block of code. To create an if condition, we need if keyword, condition inside a parenthesis, and a block of code inside a curly bracket. Let's see the syntax. First, let's see the syntax. It starts with if and a condition here to check whether it is true or false. If it is true, I might have made some mistakes. Okay, if this condition is true, I want the code inside of this curly brackets to execute. Let's add some comment. This part of the code will be executed if the condition is true. So let's see an example now. So if I say here if, let me just add comment, let me make it this comment. Okay, if I say, if let's declare a variable, let num is equals to 3, and if I say here if, let's add an if, and we have to specify condition inside of this parenthesis. So if I say here num is greater than 0, if num is greater than 0, so if num is greater than 0, I want to console log. Let's add some backticks so that we can concatenate the string, or let's concatenate the variable. I will say here the num is a positive number. Now as you can see, when I save this, it prints 3 is a positive number. That's because this condition here checks for 3 is greater than 0. It becomes true, right? If it is true, then this block of code will be executed. That is, it's a positive number. Now what if I say here -3? As you can see, -3 is not greater than 0, right? This block of code will only be executed only if this condition is true. So now if I save that, as you can see, nothing actually gets executed, right? As you can see in this condition, num is -3, it is not greater than 0. So however, this condition is false, so we won't see any results. Similarly, let's go for one more example. If I say here if, sorry, let's declare a variable first. Let is raining is set to true. It is true, storing true. If I add a if statement, if is raining, if is raining is true, I want this block of code to execute. So if I say here console log, I will say remember to take your rain, sorry, it should be rain code. Now if I save that, it prints remember to take your raincoat if this is raining is true. Now if I say here false, then this if statement fails to this condition, so it's gonna return false, so it's not going to execute this piece of code. So that's how if statements actually works. Next, let's discuss about if else statements. In case of an if else condition, if condition is true, the first block will be executed. If not, the else condition will be executed. For example, let's just comment these out. Let's see the syntax of if else first. I will write here if else syntax. Now if I say here if the condition is true, I want this piece of code to execute it. I will write here if true, execute this. Similarly, I can say here if that condition is true, execute that code, else if it is false, I want this piece of code to execute. Here I will say if false, execute this code. As simple as that. Let's see an example now. Let's comment this out. Let's see an example now. Here I will say similarly let num is greater than 3. Here I will say check for condition if num is greater than 0. I want to console log, concatenate. I will use backticks. I will concatenate the num variable is a positive number. Similarly, if it is false, I will declare a else block. I will say console log. Similarly, I will also concatenate the string num is a negative number. Now if I save this, as you can see, it prints out 3 is positive number. That's because this condition is true, then it executes this piece of code. What if I say here -3? As you can see, -3 is a negative number. That's how these if else statements actually works. Let's see and one more example which we discussed in the if. Let's take that out. I'll just copy paste here and uncomment this. Okay, in the first example, meaning that in the if example we said is raining is false. If the condition is true, I wanted this piece of code to execute. Similarly, I will say else console log, no need of raincoat. As you can see, it is false now. What do you think is gonna happen? I will save this. As you can see, it prints out no need of raincoat. That's because the condition fails. That meaning that it becomes false. So it's gonna execute the else part of this code. As you can see, the last condition is false, right? So this condition is gonna false. Therefore, the else block will be executed. What if we have more than 2 conditions? In that case, we would use else if conditions. So let's discuss about if else and the if else. On our daily life, we make decisions on daily basis. We make decisions not by checking 1 or 2 conditions. Instead, we make decisions based on multiple conditions, right? As similar to our daily life, programming is also full of conditions. We use else if when we have multiple conditions. Let's see a syntax first. I will just comment this. Okay, now let's see syntax of else if. I can say here if this condition is true, it will execute this code. Now again, I can check for one more conditions by saying else if. I can check for another condition here, and that is true. I want this code to execute. Similarly, I can also check for one more condition, else if, and then this condition is true, it's gonna execute this code. If none of these conditions are true, I will simply specify here else. This will execute this piece of code. So if this condition is true, it's gonna execute this piece of code. So if this condition is false and this condition is true, it's gonna execute this, and this is true, it's gonna execute this one. So if none of these conditions are true, then it's gonna execute the final else part. So let's see an example. Okay, let me just comment this out. Okay, here I can say let's declare a variable let a is equals to, I will write it from scratch so that you can understand it better. I will say if a is greater than 0, I will console log, add some backticks. A is a positive number. If this is true, it's going to execute this piece of code. Similarly, I will also write else if. I will say another condition here, a is less than 0. If this is true, I want to execute this piece of code. Here I will say console log, I will specify backticks, concatenate the variable is a negative number. Similarly, I will write for another condition, else if that is also not true, I will say a is equals to 0. If a is equals to 0, I will say console log, concatenate a is 0. Right? If a is equals to 0, it's gonna be 0. So let's just print that out. If none of these conditions are true, I will say else log, console log, add some backticks, concatenate again, a is not a number. Let's see what's gonna happen here. Now if I save this, it's gonna return a is 0. Why is that? As you can see, in our variable we are storing a is equals to 0. So obviously it's gonna fail at this point, so it's not gonna execute this piece of code, and it's also gonna fail at this condition. It's gonna become false, so also it ignores this piece of code. It's gonna check for this condition, it becomes true. This condition is gonna become true, so it's gonna execute this console log. What if I say here 1, and if I save that, as you can see, this becomes true, it's gonna execute this piece of code. What if I say here -1? Obviously this is gonna become true and it's gonna execute this piece of code. What if I say here b here? If I save that, obviously it's gonna return uncaught reference to b, obviously. If I say we cannot assign undeclared variable, so sorry for that, it's my bad. If I say here string, if I save that, as you can see, string, it's not a number, right? So it's gonna, if all these conditions are gonna become false. None of these conditions satisfies this value here. So it's gonna execute this else part here. That is, b is not a number. That's how these else if statements or conditions actually work. We also have switch. Switch is an alternative for if else else, right? That just now we discussed previously. It can be an alternative for that conditions. The switch statement starts with a switch keyword followed by a parenthesis and a code block. Inside the code block we will have different cases. Code block runs if the value in the switch statement parenthesis matches with the case value. The break statement, we also gonna use the break statement. It is used to terminate the execution, so the code execution does not go down after the condition is satisfied. The default block runs if all the cases doesn't satisfy the condition, similar to else block, right? Let's see the syntax so that you can understand it better. I will say here syntax of switch. Obviously it should be in comments. Okay, it starts with switch. It's gonna look for a case value. Here, inside of here, we can specify different cases. What if the case 1 is true? It's gonna execute this piece of code. After executing, we're gonna use the break statement to break the execution so that it doesn't move to another cases here. Similarly, I can add another case here. Case 2, I can also check for case 2. If this case is true, it's gonna execute this code. Similarly, we are gonna add a break statement so that it doesn't continue further checking for other conditions, other cases, you can say. Here also we also have a case 3. You can specify as many cases you want to check for. It will execute this piece of code. We also have break statement. At the last we have a default case. If none of these cases actually match the case value, so it's gonna execute the code in the default block. Let's see an example so that you can understand it better. I will just comment this out. Okay, here I will specify if switch whether. I will switch whether. Inside of here I will specify cases. Case 1 is going to be if the weather is rainy. If weather is rainy, I want to console log you need a raincoat. That's right. I will add a break statement so if it becomes true, so that it doesn't continue further execution. Similarly, I will also specify for second case if the weather value is cloudy, and here I want to console log it. If it is cloudy, if I will say it might be cold, you need a jacket. Similarly, I will also add a break statement, and I will specify for another condition if the weather value is sunny. Here I want to console log go out freely, and I will also add a break statement so that it doesn't further continue. Okay, let's add the default case. If none of them matches the weather, I will say default console log. I will just say no need of raincoat. I will just save this. Weather is not defined, so let's declare a variable. Let weather is equals to, Let's just say if the weather is equals to rainy, let's check for rainy what's it's gonna return. If I save that, as you can see, this case, actually rainy case, is gonna become true, so it's gonna execute this piece of code. You need a raincoat. What if I say here sunny, go out freely? This case actually becomes true, so it's gonna execute this code. Now what if I didn't specify break statement here, and if I save that, and if I say rain here, as you can see, it's executing it. This case is supposed to be true, right? So it should execute this piece of code. We are not having any break statement, so it's gonna continue the execution. So it's gonna execute this piece of code, and it has a break statement, so it's gonna break right there. As you can see in the console log, it might be called you need a jacket. That's why adding break statement is important while using switch cases. Now if I save that, as you can see, you need a raincoat. Now if I specify something which is not a weather, let's just say unknown, I don't know what kind of weather we have, so no need of raincoat. This case false, this case is going to be false, this case is doesn't match the weather, so it's gonna execute the default case. That's how this switch cases actually work. Similarly, we also have ternary operators, which we already discussed in the previous videos. Let's just discuss one more time. How can we write ternary operators? Let's just say let is raining. Let's take the same example. Is raining is true. I can write the ternary operator like this. If is raining, if it is raining, it's gonna check for true or false. If this variable is true, I'm gonna say I want this piece of code to execute. I'll say here console log you need a raincoat. If it is false, I will specify by adding a colon. If it is false, then this piece of code will be executed. Here I will say no need for a raincoat. Let me just comment this switch cases. As you can see in the ternary operator, if is raining is true, I want this piece of code to execute. If it is false, then it's gonna execute this piece of code. Now if I console log, as you can see, it prints out you need a raincoat. That's because is raining is true, so it's gonna execute this piece of code. So if I say here false, as you can see, no need for a raincoat, meaning this piece of code will be executed. That's it for this video. In the next video, we are gonna do some exercises so that you can understand things more better. You can actually revise whatever we have learned till now. So I will see you in the next one.